Hello everyone, I'm so glad that you are back, and I'm so glad to be back on this episode. This is the third episode in the series of Why I Believe, and this has been such a personal share for me, being able to share why I believe, why I have faith, and being able to go through that process. It's been very refreshing as well to be able to go back and to look at why I've got to this point in my life and why I am who I am now, and just seeing the zenith from that, and just seeing the genesis of when it started, and just going back to my childhood has been just really refreshing. So even like looking at, we're now at episode 3, but the first one was all about curiosity, thinking about when I was a child, thinking about me just being innocent, like saying, what happens when you die? Is it that you just dream forever, or what happens? And me just kind of having that kind of innocence and curiosity about life and death and so forth, and life beyond this life, and then the second one was more about me getting more mature, and then just really started to talk about this is too complex, it's too intricate, it's too cohesive for it to be a big bang, for it to be an accident, for it to be it just evolved into this. It's like it's too purposeful. So talking about the birds and bees, talking about the bees and honey and pollinating flowers, and talking about oxygen and trees and carbon monoxide being changed into oxygen, all of that kind of stuff just made me see that this is just too engineered, and that just brought me onto a path where I started to get more intentional and start to really think about, what do I believe, and if there is more after this, then am I prepared for this, am I ready for this, and so forth. So the episode 3 now is, I'm going to be speaking about just the pain of the discovering the new me. There is a pain when you have to discover newness, and when I had to discover a new life, there was pain involved. So growth became painful before peaceful. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I'm not going to be talking today and making you think that everything that I went through was just all fine. It was all good, and there wasn't no challenges and hurt. It really was a difficult journey, and some parts of me had to die before I could truly live. Imagine that some parts of you have to die before you can truly live, and that's just the kind of ecosystem and how it works. So when we start thinking about these things, it really can make us have to get connected to ourselves. And then when I looked at transformation became real for me, and then faith became personal. It wasn't about me copying someone else's faith. It wasn't about me parroting. It wasn't about me copycatting. It was about me discovering faith for myself, and joy eventually started emerging. But before joy, I had to go through the process. So the pain that nobody talks about, everybody talks about growth. It's kind of, whether it's an inspirational video, or it's a chat or something, or motivation, or whatever it is, people are talking about growth, and growth is a great thing and so forth. But people don't really talk about the pain. I don't think people talk about the pain enough, because it is painful, and nobody talks about the grieving of yourself, because for you to live, something has to die. So sometimes you have to be like grieving the person you once was. You have to be grieving how you once was, and allowing that to go, and knowing that you can't have the new you and the old you living at the same time. And for me, that really was something that I had to go through, and nobody really talks about the emotional exhaustion, because especially if you're stubborn or you're rebellious or whatever it is, sometimes people they're not telling you that it's going to be emotionally difficult. And it was for me, and nobody talks about the feeling of feeling lost during change, because when you are in a place that that place, you're not experiencing the sense of feeling lost at that point. It's more you feel comfortable in it. But for many of us, the comfort becomes discomfort, and we realize we need change, and then we got to go beyond where we was to go and experience something new. And staying the same was hurting me. Things that once satisfied me no longer did. Environments started feeling heavy. Places that I used to love being in, people I used to love being around, just started to feel disconnected. I just felt a disconnection internally when I was around people, when I was around certain environments, when I was around certain activities. And I was changing emotionally and spiritually, and I didn't even know why. I didn't even understand it. It wasn't like I was seeing I am becoming a believer. I didn't understand the process, and the process was something I was going through, and it was like I was grieving that something was going, but I didn't even understand it fully, and something inside of me was breaking apart, and that was something I had to get used to. Like, what on earth is going on? And I didn't understand it, but it was changing, and no one tells you about this change. They don't tell you about things like this because sometimes they don't understand it like I didn't understand it. When certain relationships began shifting, when certain friendships started changing, when my appetite for certain things was becoming different. Are you going through that? Are you kind of seeing that some of your friendships, are drifting apart, or what used to make you feel happy and joyful now, it's just not fulfilling you? This could be a sign that you're going through this kind of change, and internal conflict becomes more intense. Like before you could ignore it, you could ignore that little voice that's saying that you need to be doing some inner work, or you could be ignoring that little voice that's saying, what about God? You could ignore it, but then it starts to become more intense, and you can start to hear that this is a reality, and you can start to hear that something's going on, and then growth starts feeling isolated. You start feeling that you're isolated from people. You start feeling lonely. You start feeling like you're not around people, or people don't get you, and that is something that happens when you go through that change. And this is something that happened for me on this journey of faith, this journey of discovering a life beyond me. You might be hearing some of the symptoms, and you might be saying, this sounds like what I'm going through, or this is something that I've experienced in my life, and this is what I was going through, and I didn't fully get it, and I started to understand who I used to be. I was protecting myself emotionally. You know what I mean? Like I was self-medicating. I was into escapism. I was into just entertainment and into drinking and smoking and doing all these things that was stopping me from being sober and being able to see where I actually was. I was, into entertainment and watching things and going to cinema and doing all these things. It's like I didn't like being by myself. I didn't like being in the quiet with me. Does that sound familiar? That was my experience. Always wanted to be somewhere, always wanted to go and see someone, and to me, it was like I carried hidden pain internally, and I was trying to like ignore that pain, and control made me feel safe. And I was just trying to control situations because I was fearful. I was fearful of life. I was fearful of tomorrow. I was fearful of death. I was fearful of me just not being enough. I was so fearful, and control was making me feel safe, when I'm controlling all of these situations and circumstances, and pride resisted me being vulnerable. So I wasn't being vulnerable. I wasn't sharing the difficulties I was going through. And I know that the people that I was around at that time, they wouldn't understand, or they would probably think I am being soft, or, like, come on, Herman, pull it all together, like they probably wouldn't understand. So for me, it was like I was just holding myself together with pride. Pride was like a self-protection mechanism. And I looked okay externally, but internally I was struggling, and some things must die first, and I didn't get this, but I want you to understand that there's some things in you that must die for some things to live. There's some things in your life that must die for you to emerge. Before growth comes, something must first die. A seed must go into the ground before it grows. A seed must go into the ground and die before the plant that is actually in it for it to come out. Our old versions of ourselves must die for our new versions of ourselves to be alive. Some relationships end because growth changes direction. So when you start thinking about these things, the reality of it is death of dreams, death of people, death of, and I'm not saying that death of people, like they have to die. I'm just saying, like the relationships that you have with some people, sometimes it needs to die, and some dreams need to die because they belonged to the old you. Are there some dreams that you had before when you was younger, or the person before, that now you've been living that dream still, but it's just disconnected to you, and that might be a sign that you're becoming a new person, and you're on a new journey, and that old dream that you used to have when you was at school, that you used to have when you was in college, that you used to have when you was hanging around with those old friends, no longer as relevant in your life. And then that's when you start going through this civil war. I remember as a rapper back in the days, I wrote a track called Civil War, and it was me talking about inside of me there's a civil war, and I didn't even know what was going on, and I was like just being pulled to and froing inside, because inside of me there was a war. A part of me wanted peace, another part of me resisted change, and fear fought against surrender, and pain kept pulling me backwards, because it was like I just wanted to stay in this comfortable place, because I was afraid of experiencing new pain from new experiences, from new vulnerabilities, from new opportunities for rejection. So I was trying to stay in my past, and I felt emotionally torn within myself. And the breaking point, it came, I was going through certain experiences in my relationship, my life was going through certain things. It was like a perfect storm. Certain things were going on in my career. I had my first daughter. It was like so many things was going on in me, and I just became tired emotionally, and I became tired of pretending. It's like I had to be real with Herman and say, Herman, this is it now. Like something had to change. It couldn't just be something I'm talking about, like I want to change, but I'm just staying the same. I knew something had to change. I was tired of carrying the silent pain. I was tired of controlling everything and trying to be in controller. And slowly I started letting go. And the reality of it was, for me, I could no longer sit on the fence. And the reality for you is you cannot sit on the fence forever. Eventually, everyone must make a decision. Stay neutral is still a choice. It is a choice. You can be in neutral, but neutral is like nothing's going on, or you're just in this middle place that has no definition, and fear keeps many stuck between two lives. At some point, you must decide what you truly believe. The fear of staying the same must become greater than the fear of change. Do you hear that? The fear of staying the same must become greater than the fear of change. And the tension between pain and joy, that is something that really happened for me. And as I started to really consider Christ and consider that faith is the direction I wanted to go in, I started to see that I'm going to have to change. I'm going to have to change, like, habits, some of the things that I really love, and I started to realize that change is going to be difficult. I started to see that even though it's going to be difficult, like healing hurts as well, because when you go through healing, even on the way of becoming better, sometimes you have to look at what's not good. You have to look at what the pain is. You have to look at things without the self-medication. You have to look at things without the escapism, without the hiding, and you start seeing that this hurts and the healing must start. But you have to realize that you got to feel before you can heal, and being able to grow is uncomfortable, but stagnation suffocates. And so many of us have been stagnated in our lives. What I'm speaking about isn't something that I'm just talking about like it's theory. This ain't a theory. This is an opinion. This is like real life experience. And many people in their lives, they have these experiences. I'm sure you're going through somewhere. There's some area that you're stagnant in. There's some area where you're suffocating in. There's some area that you're not flourishing in. And for me, it was like the entirety of my life. Like my life was stagnation. My life was suffocating. And I realized that the temporary pain can save you from perpetual pain. Sometimes you have to go through a pain that now it's a pain that you're trying to avoid, but it's a pain that it's only a temporary pain, because it's a pain that you probably go through for 3 months, for 6 months, but it's a pain that actually gets rid of having that pain for 10 years. And some of us have avoided the pain and kept in a pain for 10 years when we could have gone through a different pain for 5 months, for a year, and then we could have had 9 years that there wasn't that same pain. And that could be like in a relationship, that could be like you stay in a relationship that you need to come out of. That could be staying in a job that you should come out of. That could be staying in a career that you should come out of. That could be staying in the old version of yourself when you should come out of that version and go into the new version. And for me, that happened, and it was a crisis, and it hurt, and it was painful, and it was difficult. And I realized I needed Christ. I needed the Lord. I cried out to the Lord, and he heard me. The Lord heard me. The Lord heard my cry. And, the Lord won't despise wherever you're coming from or however you're coming from. And, you don't have to have your life together. You could be in the pit, you could be in the valley, you could be in a painful place, you could be on the mountains, wherever you are, you could be in that place. And the Lord just still accepts you. And for me, when I made that decision, the first thing I really experienced when the Lord saved me is I experienced like this big, massive weight come off my shoulders. Like this weight could have been the weight. And it was the weight really from like all my life up until that point where I was in limbo, where I was in conflict, where I was in civil war, where I was in moral dilemmas, where I knew that my morality wasn't what it should have been. And I knew that better was in me and I wasn't living better. And I knew better was expected of me, when I wasn't living that better, all of that weight, all of that confusion, all of that, that conflict that I was carrying for years. When I made that decision and Christ accepted me and I stepped into salvation, I just felt the weight of everything just fall off, and peace just slowly replaced inner chaos. Oh my gosh. I started feeling lighter internally, in my thoughts, in my thinking, in my heart. And joy appeared in small moments, and my life just changed. People around me seen the change. They've seen how I was dealing with things. They've seen my values change. They've seen that I no longer was waiting for music or waiting that I had to be a big rap star to be happy in life. It was like I was ready to not do rap, and I was already happy. I wasn't like saying, then I'll be happy, then I'll be happy, then I'll be happy, then I'll be happy, then. So many people be saying that I'll be happy then. When I finish my degree, I'll be happy then. When I get to this point in my life, I'll be happy then. When I get money, I'll be happy then. When I get married, I'll be happy then. So many of us are putting off happiness now for happy then. And that's what I done. And healing started to become visible in my life, and faith became real. And I really started to see Jesus in my life, and prayer became honest conversations, with a God that I was now connected with, and I was happy to be connected with, and I wasn't like afraid of at that time, like for so many years I was so afraid of being judged. I was so afraid of all the things I was doing that was going to be judged. Like I knew in my heart of hearts, I knew after this life, there's going to be a reckoning. I knew. I didn't want to admit it. I wanted to deny it. I wanted to make excuses about it, but I knew. And I just felt God wasn't pleased with me. God was angry with me and so forth. And now I was in this time and I realized that I never had that enmity between me and God, which was amazing. And God became real in my everyday life, and I really realized that I needed to have a God with me in my life that was a God that would be interested in my career, would be interested in my relationships, would be interested in my mental health, would be interested in my finances, would be interested in my aspirations, and wouldn't just be interested in me going to church, wouldn't just be interested in me reading the Bible, but interested in me as a person holistically. And I discovered that Jesus is that God. and I stopped performing externally. I just really saw that God accepted me, and I started to see that relationship replaced religion. And not saying that there hasn't been that journey or that struggle and so forth, but we need to understand, and I've gone on that journey where God's interested in relationship. God's not interested in performance, that you're performing every day and performing that you're right and that you're righteous. Then it's like you don't need God, do you? If you can perform your way into God's good books, you don't need God. But I start to see that relationship with Jesus Christ was real, and God was real, and I start to see so many things. I start to see prayers being answered. I start to see all different types of specific prayers around my career, around marriage, around my finances, and just different things, and just seeing that God was real. God was more than a theory. God was more than the God that someone else was talking to me about. Like, this was the God that I knew. This was the God that I was learning about, and this God knew me, and I really started to see that faith became something I experienced personally. So when I started to see all of those things and start to go through all of that process, a new life was possible. I started becoming who I was meant to be. I became more emotionally aware, and peace replaced constant internal tension, and purpose. I discovered purpose, oh my gosh, became clearer and clearer over time, and seeing transformation became powerful. And I finally understood purpose is not just about success. Purpose is about alignment internally and alignment with God. That's what purpose was about, and healing in the process. And God uses pain to transform us, and your pain can become a part of your purpose, and believing changed the direction of my life. So I want to pray right now. I want to pray for anyone that is just thinking about their life, and they're just in this place and feeling that there's more to life than I'm experiencing, or they're feeling that I should have more. There's more for me, but they don't know how to access it. And I want to pray for you because I know what that feels like. Lord Jesus, I thank you so much for this moment. I thank you for everyone that is listening to this prayer. I thank you that you love everyone that is listening to this prayer. I thank you that you have a plan that is a good plan for everyone that is listening to this prayer. I thank you that you love everyone, and you want to let them know how much you care about them, and how much you want them to know that you have a purpose for their lives, and that you want them to come into a place of recognizing that what you're saying is true and what they're saying isn't true, because two people cannot be God. It's got to be your God or their God. And if they're their own God, they've got to save themselves. They've got to provide for themselves, and they've got to try and even qualify themselves, which they cannot qualify themselves in your eyes if they are doing it all for themselves, because you died and went on that cross for us. You done it, that we don't have to do it, but we just have to accept it, and we just have to believe it, and we just have to discover who you are and learn from you, and be in relationship with you, and you've been a father to us, and you showing us how to live, you showing us how to do things, you showing us what you have for us, and us working in collaboration with you, us working in partnership with you, us working in sync with you, and us not fighting you and resisting you, but us growing with you. And that's what you want for us. So I pray everyone that is listening, that is desiring a better life, that's desiring more purpose in their life, and desiring to know you, that you will come into their life, you will come into their dreams, you will come into their hearts, you will come into their careers, you will come into their environments and show that you are real, and that they will see that you are true God, you're a real God, and you're not just the God of their nan or the God of their mom or the God of their friend, but you are their God, and you are the live and living God. And I pray this right now, and I thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. So I want to say thank you for being with me on this episode. It's kind of been like a real personal episode, and I've shared this, and I want you to know that pain can start things and bring you to your beginning, and understand that breaking can be what leads you to change, and making you understand that change can be something that can bring about joy. Faith became real for me, and faith can become real for you. And I hope that this is something that can come into your life, and this is why I believe. So I want to say thank you for your time. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing the videos. Thank you for commenting. And thank you for being along this journey with me. And come back next week as we continue on this journey. Take care. Bye.